Hello and welcome to this video in which I'm going to show you the steps that I go through to create my Wargaming terrain boards. I was asked on the Little Wars Discord, Little Wars TV Discord channel if I could just explain how I come set up tables and what I use and things. So this is going to be a video about that. It's going to show you how I made this board for an attack in 1943 during the Kursk salient attacks from the Germans using the rules for O Group, which are relatively new. I will be playing that game and I'm going to be filming it as well, so you'll be able to see that video on the channel, either if it comes out before or after this video, I'm not sure, but it will be on the channel. Have a look for it. So yeah, as I said, this is basically part of the introduction to historical wargaming series, in that I'm just really showing you what kind of things I have to create historical board game war games, really, and I hope you enjoy it. First things first is the board itself. This is the table. So this is a standard size wargaming table. This is about 6 foot by 4 foot exactly. This is actually made up of two 3 foot by 4 foot MDF boards, and as you can see here, what I had done in the past is I've used static grass to give these some form of texture. And I've also, this one is gridded because I've gridded one side of it, the other side of it is the same as this one. This is what I used to use, but you can also see as well, unfortunately on these, there's quite a lot of damage from them being shifted about. You can see where bits are being peeled off. It's not perfect coverage from the static grass. So I don't really use these anymore. I just use it as the base. I do use this board for games like Rommel or Square Bashing, but the plain green one I'm not that bothered about using anymore, really. So what I do have instead is a couple of cloths. I picked these ones up from Tiny War Games. I've got a green grass one, a basic green grass one there, and also a concrete one. So our first choice really is what theatre we're playing in, and I know I'm going to be doing a German attack on a Soviet position in 1943, so I'm going to be using it's going to be green grass, middle of summer. So I've just got my green grass cloth here, which I then spread out across. This is a 6 by 4 cloth, so this should fit the entire table. It's just a perfect size for this. So this is my first choice, really, is just deciding exactly what theatre I'm playing in, and also the time of year as well. To be perfectly honest, I pretty much play on a green grass cloth all the time, largely because it just makes it easier for basing figures and for other bits and pieces as well. It's a simple, typical, almost middle of the road wargaming cloth. So that's how it looks when it's laid out. Smooth it down a little bit. You can iron it as well if there's any creases in this thing. Let me just smooth that out a bit better. And as I say, you don't really need one of these. You could buy one. I think it was about £60 thereabouts. There's lots of different companies that do them, and if you really wanted to, you could just actually stick books and things under this to make hills and that kind of thing. And then I've got to start thinking about populating the board itself, and you can see here these are really useful boxes. This is my terrain collection, or some of it. There's a bit more just around the corner, but in each of these what I've tried to do is keep my different types of terrain relatively within the same box, so I know exactly, I can just pull a box out and I know it's going to have similar kind of stuff in. So in this top here, this is First World War scenery, so there's a lot of shell craters, there's really damaged buildings, there's a few battered trees and things in there. Below that you can see, probably just pick out some of these rural buildings here. These are generally used, I use these on the Eastern Front, so I'm going to be using these. I'm going to pull this out in a second. But below this we also have some science fiction style terrain. You can just see poking through little bits and pieces of Star Wars style stuff there. I'll be using that for Star Wars or even Judge Dredd. There's a bit more of that down here in this pile as well, and then even more of it there. So I've got 3 boxes. Below here we have jungle terrain, so you can see I've got 2 boxes there of jungle terrain. So this is all for Malaya or for any other jungles I want to use. I can sometimes use this in Star Wars games just to make it a bit like an alien planet. And then finally at the bottom of this pile at least is some urban ruins. So these are more like your factories and cityscapes, and that is full of that kind of stuff. So if I'm doing a Stalingrad style game, or I want some more city terrain, then I'll go for that one. But as I say, at the moment I'm going to go, I want the rural terrain here, because we're fighting in Kursk and it's quite a rural area. Just while we're on the subject of the terrain itself as well, here's some more boxes of terrain. Again, these are the really useful boxes, the 18 litre boxes. They're perfect because they stack up and I can get a lot of terrain into them. They don't take up a great deal of space, but I've got, what, 4 there and another 2, 4, 6, 8. So about 14 boxes full of these. Remember that this is a collection of at least 25 to 30 years old in some cases. So, you know, I've got a lot of it, but it doesn't mean to say that you have or you need a lot of it. We'll talk about that later on. But just again, looking into these boxes here, as we can see, these are more brick buildings, so more urban terrain. This is less factory stuff and more like domestic buildings, so houses and shops and that kind of thing. Then I also have underneath that trees. Incredibly important. If you buy any kind of terrain, just get trees, because trees can be used everywhere and everywhere, and they are everywhere and everywhere. Then below this I have some bigger pieces, like there's a church there, a burnt out church, a couple of the bits and pieces in there. And then also at the bottom I have some of my Romano, British and Gaulish terrain as well. So there's some ancient stuff in there that can be used as well. I said 14 boxes, there's actually another 4 boxes here, so I've got 18 of these boxes absolutely stuffed full of terrain. So this stuff at the back here, you might just be able to pick it out, sorry for the light, but this is mostly urban factory buildings, so this isn't really for Stalingrad and that kind of setting. Again, collected these over years, so I wouldn't worry too much about not having as much terrain as I've got. I've just got tons of it because I just keep adding to it as it goes on. And another important part of your terrain collection really should be roads and rivers. These I've got a couple of different ones. These ones I've bought. Everybody asks me where these come from. I'll tell you now, they're from Miniature World Builder. It's an Australian company. I bought them here in the UK at Magister Militum years ago. They're rubber or latex, cobblestone surface. Really nice. They're good, they're thick. I've had them for probably about 20 years at this point, and they work perfectly well. These roads I made myself, literally out of pieces of cardboard with plaster, and then just scraped, painted brown, added some flock on the edge, and they're done. I just made quite a few different ones of these, just as cart roads and dirt roads and that kind of thing. The rivers, I think these are JR miniatures, I can't be sure. But again, I think I got these from Magister Militum here in the UK. But you can get roads, you can get rivers and roads everywhere and anywhere. Same with some of these bridges. These ones I think might be battle scale miniatures. Got those quite recently. There's some more in there. So this is kind of like my road and river collection in here, just in this box. I'll try and keep it separate from everything else because I generally use a road at least, or a river, on pretty much every table that I play on. And then also over here I have another box. Now I've got a massive, this looks like a lot, but actually underneath this are my really old gaming boards. You can see the change in gaming boards. These are really old, I think they're S&S models gaming boards. These are, I must have bought these about 25 years ago, and they are flocked polystyrene blocks basically, and there's enough in there for a 6x4 table. That's why it's in such a big box. I'm loath to get rid of them, but you know, they definitely paid for themselves over the years, but I'm kind of just hanging on to them with grim resolve at this point really. But also in here I have a lot of my rural stuff. So these are relatively new hills that I bought. Just got these just a few weeks ago. In fact, these are really nice. I can't remember where I got them from, but I will put links in the description if I remember. I also got these marshes as well relatively recently, simply for infamy, but they do for everything and everything. These are the cornfields. These were incredibly easy to make. All I did was go out to a cheap shop, buy a doormat in the colour I wanted, which is yellowish, because you know it's corn is yellow. Cut it into squares, you can see there it's vinyl on the back, and then just added static grass to the edge, and that's it, you've got a cornfield. And I just did that with just one of these things, and I've got plenty of cornfields there which I can just chuck across a table and just fill up space. I've also got other hills as well here. These ones I made myself, but they didn't turn out particularly well. These were just made out of thick foam board. I just cut it off the edge and then just added static grass to it. It was these that actually made me buy the newer ones from somebody else. I thought, if that's the best I can do, somebody else can do better, and they can. The old ones came with the game boards. These smaller ones, these came with the game boards. You don't really need hills. As I said, you could just use the cloth, a green cloth, and then put books or anything underneath it, just to give you a bit of size. I don't always use hills when I'm playing a skirmish game like Chain of Command, because hills aren't always that obvious. But if I'm playing a bigger game like I'm playing O group, like battalion level, I will use hills, so I'm going to be using those today. I also got some ploughed fields here. These I made myself. Again, this is really simple stuff. This is just, I think, 2mm MDF. I just added on some textured wallpaper, painted it brown, and hey presto, you've got a ploughed field. Obviously static grass around the edge, and that's your ploughed field. So I got that. That's probably a little bit too big for my needs, but let's have a look. There's a few more in here somewhere as well. They're probably falling down the side. I'll dig them out in a minute. The other thing you can see, these little brown things, these were just some polystyrene balls that I had that I cut into, to make them into, cut them in half, added them onto a base, plastered them and painted them, and these I kind of use in Star Wars just as an alien termite mound or something like that, just some alien planets kind of thing. It was just using up some old materials. What you can also see here as well is some woods. These are essentially 2mm woods. This is, what's it called? This is clump foliage, absolutely slathered in PVA and then stuck onto plastic card, and then left to dry for about 2 weeks, because it took forever, because you have to absolutely slather it, but it's as hard as nails and doesn't fall to pieces. This I use for things like Blucher, where the level of the game is way higher than you would normally see trees and things, so that's why I've done a few of those. But I also use these as well as patches of foliage as well on in games like O Group or even Chain of Command, that kind of thing. So I have multiple uses. I like to get as much use out of every piece of terrain I have. This is an old hill that somebody gave me, which I just added static grass to, repainted the stones on it. I don't really use it too often because it's a bit old and battered, but it's there if I need it. There's the other. I knew there were some more ploughed fields in here, so there's the other ones on smaller bases, all again just 2mm MDF. This is just offcuts. You can go to any hardware store and ask them for MDF offcuts, and they'll probably will also cut it down for you as well, so you can get random shapes and random sizes. And speaking of MDF, I've got these as well, which you can probably see. Again, 2mm or 3mm, maybe a bit thicker MDF. These I use as the base for my woods. So I will put a couple of these together, stack trees on top of them, and instead of having the trees fixed, I've got them so I can move them and I can put figures in around the trees if I need to. But it also shows you the definition of the woodland itself. So you're not saying, are we on the edge of the wood? Are we within the woods? We've got a definite line. I mean, obviously it's not 100% realistic, but from a gaming point of view, it answers a lot of questions. I like to populate my boards these days. There's a big shift in wargaming boards. It's gone really from just having beautiful figures on the table to actually having beautiful tables with beautiful figures on them. And I'm trying to emulate that as much as possible, with varying degrees of success. But I got these from Sabotage. These are concrete pylons, and these just line the roads, just to add a little bit of interest, because, you know, real life isn't just flat. It does have things on it, especially when you're near urban centres, or even, you know, you need electricity running down into various different villages and things like that. So that's just something else I throw on the board as well. I'll probably put these on for O group. They're probably more like a skirmish level kind of decoration, but they just look nice anyway, and it just makes the board look more interesting and appealing to play on. So these are just some of the little extras that I also add as well. And whilst I'm this way, I'll talk about these trees as well. So this is the box of trees. I'll say 18 litre, really useful box full of trees. If you're going to buy anything terrain-wise, get trees, because trees, as I said, can be used for anything. They're great for blocking line of sight. They're great for just making a bit of height on your table. If nothing else, really, you could just be fighting through a forest quite easily, or patches of forest. These are all different sizes. These are railway modeler trees of various manufacturers from all over the place. I usually buy them pre-made because I really just can't be bothered to make trees. Having said that, somebody did give me a load of plastic armatures years ago for some trees, so I did the whole clump foliage slathered in PVA trick on these as well. So I got about 15 new trees out of that, and these are quite nice because these look like the typical trees in Italy or France even that will be lining the road. So they're very useful for Western Europe, if nothing else. The rest, I've got a real selection of different kinds of trees. I mentioned the palm trees that I've got elsewhere, but these are more like Western European or even Eastern Front type of trees and foliage. So this is just a real mix of stuff. As I said, different sizes. There's some all the way down to, you know, this size here, up to these massive big trees as well, because trees don't just come in one size. Different colours as well. Some of these actually belong to my friend, so I probably should dig them out and separate them. But as it is at the moment, they're staying in there, and they will stay in there for a while until he wants to come and pick them up again. So that's the trees. They are probably the most important terrain thing you can buy. So I would, you know, don't scrimp on them. And you can get them everywhere, on eBay, on Amazon, in any local railway modelling shop even, and, you know, wargaming shows as well. You can pay however much you want to pay for them, or you can pay as cheap as chips for them as well. I think, you know, some of these ones, for instance, I got them on eBay for next to nothing from China. Just literally, you can buy hundreds for pennies. So it's up to you how much you want to spend, and it's also up to you if you want to make your own, but personally I just wouldn't bother. So now it's time to start actually setting the table up, and now you've got to start thinking about what you want to represent on your table, really. I've got a German attack during the Battle of Kursk coming in against the Soviets in 1943. So this was fought largely over steppe, so it was relatively flat land, but any small crease in the ground can be used as cover, so I kind of wanted to emulate that, but not with too many hills. So I've just pulled out a few hills here. I also want to, at least when you're defending, you've got to remember as well that these are trained soldiers, so they will have chosen a place that is going to be good to defend. They're not just going to be, you know, behind a wood where they can't see anything, so they're going to want to actually probably be, you know, think about the Battle of Waterloo. Where did Wellington put his soldiers? They were on a ridge just behind, so they had good observation over the field in front of them, and they could see the enemy's movements. This is the kind of thing you want to be thinking about when you're setting up. So just think, you know, where would the Soviet defence line be? Probably on a ridge, maybe on the edge of woodlands, probably with an urban environment built into it, possibly you know, rural buildings, so farms or a small village, that kind of thing. You know, most battles, if you think about them, generally take place at least near some kind of urban sprawl or spread. There's usually buildings somewhere in most battles, because they need them for headquarters, they need them for, they're good for defensive positions, all that kind of stuff. And also, especially in places like Western Europe, you can't go very far without actually bumping into some kind of urban terrain anyway. So think about things like that when you're setting up, first of all. So I'm just going to, first of all, just put out these hills slightly randomly, but I want them so that both sides I'm kind of, again, the attack is going to go in on a place where it's going to be relatively easy to attack. So I'm kind of just separating these hills out a little bit, really. So I don't want too many because, as I said, it's a bit of a step. So we've kind of got a bit of a valley in the centre there with a couple of hills on the back. So the Germans have got an observation post, so have the Russians here on here, either of these if they want to use them. Okay, so now I've kind of set up the basics, the real basics at this point. So I put the road on, and I thought the Germans are going to try to capture this crossroads. This is going to be probably a village will probably be there, or it's just going to be a vital road, that gives you lateral as well as up and down movement. So it's going to be relatively vital that they get this. This is going to be their objective, to capture that. The Russians have got the advantage of having a hill, so they'll be elevated, and another one over there, and a bit of woodland as well there, which I'll add to in a second. I've also put out a couple more patches of my wood, so you can see this is why I use these, that you can make these out of green or brown cloth if you really want to, dead cheap. I made mine out of MDF. It makes no real difference. It's just to give you delineations of woodland. So I'm just kind of thinking what's the best at the moment, and I'm trying not to unbalance the game too much to the attacker or the defender at this point, because as I say, when you do attack in real life or when you defend in real life, there's a lot of decisions going to where you go and how you do it. So I'm trying to emulate that a little bit rather than just swinging it one way or the other. I don't want to give anyone a particular advantage, and this is what I usually do unless I'm following a particular historical scenario. This is what I'll usually do with my friends as well. So I'll usually set up before they arrive, and I'll just try and balance out the table as much as possible, but without it being too obvious or without it falling towards one side or the other as well, because it makes for a pretty rubbish game if one of you already has a massive advantage. So the next thing I'll do now is I will add on the buildings. I'll have a think about those, and I'll just add some of these on as well. I'll decide once I've finished adding those on just how many I want and how it looks, and then probably add some more or take some away, but I'll do that next. I do apologise, my neighbour is doing some DIY work, and if you can hear a drill in the background, that's what that is. Now I've added a few buildings. I've clustered some around the crossroads itself because I thought this is a little village that is the important objective for the Germans in this particular game. I've also got a couple of isolated farms, so there's one over here, and then we've got another one over here made up of a couple of buildings. I'm going to say that these are built up areas themselves, so I will add some fences to these just to delineate where the edges are, and then I will also just add some extra bits and pieces to the village itself. We're largely there at this point. I want to add the fields. The farms, the placement of the farms is probably going to really dictate where the fields go. So there's probably going to be one or two close to this small farm, and then there will be some clustered around the village itself. The rest of the table will probably be relatively open because it is a steppe. But then we've also got these clumps of field trees as well, so they're going to be filled out. So that's my next step, is really just to start adding in some of the details, and also I'll be putting some fences down the sides of the roads and things, again to break up line of sight, and also just to give that impression of people living here. So now I've added the trees, I've also added the hedges and the fences. As I said, I've just broken up some of these lines of sight. I've had these fields as well, put the fields in close to the farms where I would have thought they would be. I had a rethink about the trees, and I thought, because it's a steppe, there isn't that many trees. There are small clumps here and there, but nothing, not as many as I had. So I've actually taken off a couple of the forest patches that I did have in, and I've only left 4 on there. Instead, I've used the fields. They will provide cover because it's high corn, so they will be obscured if they're in the fields. That's what I've decided for this. So what we've got is a bit of a German advance coming down the centre of the table, really, through these cornfields. So they still have cover when they're actually moving through the table itself. But we've also got, a Soviet defence line, which is up on this high ridge of high ground with a bit of a forest in front of it, and also the village itself. The attack is going to be, as I say, straight down that centre into the village, and hopefully capturing that crossroads. It's also given the Germans a couple of points that they can use as consolidation points for O group, the rules I'm using. So you know, this particularly maybe that field, that clump of trees there, or maybe one of these fields, they can actually bring units out of there later on. Over on this side they've also got the farm they could use, and also another clump of trees, and maybe even this farm, even though it's a little bit further back than the actual village itself. So that's really the steps that I've taken just to set this up, and some of the thinking behind setting up a Wargames table. I have said, you know, repeatedly, you don't have to have this much terrain. Most of this could be produced by getting different coloured cloth or cardboard and just cutting out squares or different shapes and just adding them to the field until you've actually got enough to represent the things on the table itself. But I just prefer, because I've got a big collection of terrain, I just prefer to have a relatively nice looking table that we can fight over. I just like to, you know, I'm looking at the marvel, the spectacle of the game itself as much as anything else, not just the figures. Well, I hope this has given you a few tips and a few ideas yourself that you can take away from this video. It's just a very basic randomisation of how I do things. If you have enjoyed it, please do subscribe to the channel. Also check out my blog as well, you'll see it in the description below. And stay tuned for other videos, including the actual game that I'm going to play on this as well. I'm not sure if it will be released before this video or after this video, but I can assure you it will be on the channel, so you can actually see how the game went using this particular terrain board. So anyway, thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.